Executive Director of Project Alive. We are a Hunter syndrome research and advocacy organization. As you can probably see from my slide, I was supposed to have a wonderful partner here today, Nathan Grant. He is a board member of Project Alive and also a Harvard Medical School student. And unfortunately, Harvard has very tight regulations and schedules, and so he could not be here today. So I will do my best in his absence. So our project here is all about MPS, the journey from pediatric to adult healthcare transition. Let's see if I can get these to, there we go. So as you can see, we got some of our family photos here. Nathan and I are both members of the MPS II community. My younger brother had MPS II. I will go into that a little bit later. And my son has MPS II. And Nathan also has a twin brother. So that's sort of what brought us here and leading us through this journey. So all of you here probably already know a lot of the statistics around rare disease. So I won't go through that too heavily. But one thing that's important to know is that while there's so many rare diseases that have their onset during childhood, there are so many that present into adulthood as well. And with so many medical advancements that we're seeing today, more and more we see children that may have had life expectancies before they reached adulthood are now having the opportunity to grow into adulthood. And for those of us, such as in the Hunter syndrome community, where our children often didn't reach adulthood, and we now have these clinical trials and potentials for longer lifespans, we're asking ourselves, well, what happens then, right? We've never had to branch out into adult hospitals and think about those sort of transition periods. So that's really what prompted Nathan and I to come to this point. So what we've done so far is looking at what is available in this space in the current world that we have with very little research and literature on this information. We were able to talk to some families. Project Alive put out a community survey. Just being part of the community, we've talked to different parents and patients themselves and really heard that this is something that people struggle with. Soon you'll be able to hear a quick video of Nathan where he talks about his brother's journey and where there was just so many issues transitioning from pediatric hospitals into adult hospitals, and that journey is still not over for so many. So what we found is that a lot of families are feeling as though when they reach that point where they need to start moving into adult hospitals, they don't have the resources, they don't have the knowledge, and most importantly, they don't have a specific contact that can help guide them through this process. And they're craving that. They're feeling as though they are kind of left to figure it all out on their own. And frankly, that's not something that should be the burden of the caregiver or the patients themselves. They need some sort of support, some sort of education and resources to get through that process. So our project is mostly focused on, entirely focused on the MPS disorders. There are MPS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. And these are a group of lysosomal storage disorders that affect many different parts of the body. Each MPS type might have certain specific characteristics, but many of them share a lot of the same features when it comes to things like short stature, airway obstructions, different cardiac involvement, and other types of involvements with the major organ systems. And for some of our disease types, there's a neurological impact, which really brings along a lot of very unique issues that patients have to deal with when they move into the adult healthcare system. One of the biggest pieces is that with the short stature and unique types of airway structures and everything, it's very challenging to find adult hospitals that have the proper equipment to be able to have surgical or any other type of procedures for patients that live with MPS. Sorry about that. What we were able to do so far is do some literature review. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find anything that's current in the United States that has to do with MPS. We were able to find a couple studies out of France and Turkey that really highlight the need for supports and show that there's a current lack of support during this process, and highlights the issues that the families are facing and how they feel that they've been kind of left to deal with this on their own. We were also able to look at some other disease types that may share some similarities, but not all, to MPS, and that's where we found the gap. And we hope that with our study, we'll be able to talk about MPS specifically, some of the unique features that cause extra burden when transitioning to adulthood, but also looking into how this process affects not only the patient, but also the caregivers, and holistically, right? Because what we found is that in a family, it's not always just mom and dad or guardian. It might be sibling and grandparent and aunt and neighbor that step in as caregivers. And sometimes that burden can be really shared when they're going through this process and feeling lost. I think I skipped one. Sorry about that. Okay, maybe it came out of order. So we will go ahead and show Nathan's quick video where he will tell a little bit about his story. Since he isn't here to share that himself, I believe they're going to pull that up for us.
Hi, my name is Nathan Grant. I am a second-year medical student at Harvard Medical School and a board member of Project Alive. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to work with Kristin and other experts on this project, and I'm very sorry that I can't be with you all today in person due to some clinical obligations. This project and this conference is important and very personal to me because my twin brother Nick has a rare disease called MPS II, also known as Hunter syndrome. Nick was diagnosed with MPS around the age of 3, and ever since we've attended numerous medical appointments to find care for my brother. Because of his condition, my brother has both physical and neurological issues and requires care from cardiologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, geneticists, and many other specialties. While we're very grateful for the care that my brother has received, it has been difficult because my brother is getting older and he's aged out of a lot of services, including the medical care he has received from a young age. Just recently, my brother has aged out of his pediatric hospital where he has received care since the age of 3, and all of his providers have started to initiate the transition to adult care. But what's been very challenging is that all of his pediatric specialists have initiated the transition to adult care at different times. So currently, my brother is still receiving care from his pediatric geneticist and some of his other pediatric specialties like complex care and primary care, but his neurologist, as well as other specialties, are transitioning to adult care. So it's not clear at the moment where my brother can receive care, and all of his different providers are in different systems and don't always coordinate the medical records, information, and care together. And really, it's been up to my parents and me as a family to be the coordinators for his care during this transition period and during this period of uncertainty. This has caused my family a lot of fear, a lot of concern, and it's worrisome about what to do when my brother has, for example, a medical emergency. Where do we go? Do we go to the pediatric hospital, the adult hospital? Who will care for him and who will coordinate that care after the emergency? All of these concerns have caused me and inspired me to reach out to other families in the MPS community to look to see what they are doing as their loved ones with MPS age. And this issue has brought me to ask Kristin and other MPS members what's out there, what is currently known about the transition process, what services and supports are available. And while there's not much available, this has really inspired me to work together with Kristin and other experts in the country to find answers to help people with MPS and their families as they age from pediatric to adult care. I hope you enjoy the rest of this presentation, and if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to our story.
Thank you. Apologies, this device is a little finicky. Okay, It skipped a slide, so I'll just pretend as if it's there. I wanted to give my background just a little bit further. So my younger brother, as I mentioned, Zachary, he had Hunter syndrome, and he was diagnosed back in 1996 where there were absolutely zero options for treatment. My brother was able to receive enzyme replacement therapy in 2006, so he was about 10 years old by that time and had many different symptoms of Hunter syndrome that could not be reversed. But it extended his life for some time and gave him a little bit more quality of life. And while we were told that he would live between 7 and 14 years old, he lived until he was 19 years old. And now, with the birth of my son, who was diagnosed actually before he was born, about 3 years after my brother had passed, there had been so much that had changed in the world of Hunter syndrome in that short period of time, and the opportunities that my son has today far exceed the opportunities that my brother had. And we see children that are born after my son, and mind you, my son is only 4 years old, but just in the last couple of years, there's been so much medical advancements for Hunter syndrome, and the hope that we have as a community to see vast changes in the outlook of Hunter syndrome, the life expectancies of kids born today with Hunter syndrome, and we hope that will continue. So that's really where the passion comes from, to try to address these issues before we even get there. Again, my son's 4, so I've got a long way to go, but as you all know, with the rare disease, time is just not our friend. So everything we do it in a hurry. And I'll start getting, I just want to be clear that the research side is very much Nathan's forte, so I will try to present this as best as I can in his absence. But our research study is currently really focused on just hearing from the families. We have the literature review piece of it too, but we want to talk to the patients, we want to talk to the caregivers. And again, the caregiver can be anyone that is partaking in taking care of someone with MPS. We will conduct a survey that will be for separately, whether you're an adult with MPS or if you're a caregiver of someone with MPS. And for some families, it might be, a caregiver and the adult themselves that both answer this, but we feel that their experiences may be very different. We want to hear about that. We also, again, want to highlight how this process, if there was undue stress that maybe affected the individual, whether mentally or physically, and really highlighting the well-being and how that plays a part, and having a lack of supports can really affect the entire family that's living with these rare diseases. And the big piece will be really identifying what has the transition process looked like, or for those that maybe haven't experienced a full transition process, maybe there's only been one provider that has moved on to adult care, but what are the feelings surrounded by that, or how soon did you start that process, and really trying to understand the full story, and also looking at some demographic pieces to understand if there are any other parts that might lead to this. Maybe it's a socioeconomic issue. Maybe it depends on where you live that you have a better experience through this process. There's so many pieces to that. So we're hoping to get a full picture. So this is our team. Nathan, as I mentioned, he is our PI. I'm here serving as really a liaison with the community and providing some patient caregiver voice to the discussion. We have Dr. Euler and his partner, Susan Shansky, who's a social worker, and they actually both work at the Bridges Adult Transition Program at Boston Children's Hospital, which has been really valuable for us because we haven't found many formal transition programs, but they have one, and we want to be able to hear what's working there with the disease types that you may have currently, and how can we really use what you've learned and spread that throughout the rest of the country. We have Dr. Joseph Munzer, who, if you know anything about MPS, you know his name because we consider him to be the leading expert in all things MPS. And we have Dr. Julie Isengart, who has really taken such an interest in studying the neurocognitive and behavioral aspects of MPS, and she's just been really great at being able to help us identify those challenges that families and patients are experiencing and maybe how to address those. So again, we have a mix of a qualitative and quantitative survey that we will be sending out to families who are in the U.S. and participants who are 18 and over. There's, again, a separate survey for adult patients and a separate survey for caregivers, and I kind of went through those different pieces of that survey. So what we've been able to do so far before our survey gets sent out, hopefully next month, is we had a focus group with just a few families of different disease types. Some were adult patients, some were caregivers, and we wanted to have a good mix, but really to go through that survey, make sure that we're capturing everything, but also to collect some information and stories of things that people are already experiencing. We had some information again from the Project Alive community survey that we did, and that survey was really just a general survey to get to know our community better and to find out things like, what are the struggles that you're having? What are some things that we can do about it? What do you need from us? But from that survey came some of the anecdotes that I'll be able to share that led to this in the first place. And since then, with this focus group and other conversations, we found that it's just not rare. It's not a rare experience that people are struggling through this process. So here's a couple of quotes from some of the groups that we were able to speak to, and I'll just sort of highlight these. So a couple of them mentioned about how their transition timeline has been really inconsistent, that one specialist might say, hey, you've aged out of the pediatric care, you need to move on to an adult hospital or clinician, and then other specialists won't have that, or the conversation hasn't even been had of when that will occur. There's really no formal timeline. They feel, many of them talked about feeling an inability to plan ahead, that sometimes there's a fear that when you show up to the doctor's office, maybe this is the day that they're going to tell you, hey, it's the last time I can see you, move on. And that can be really terrifying because, as many families that live with rare disease know, it's hard for us to find doctors that we're comfortable with, that know about our disorder. One of the adult patients mentioned, when there's a lot of turnover at the hospital, or when I have to move on to a new doctor's office or any of those things, all of a sudden patient becomes teacher, right? And I'm having to start all the way over explaining to you about my rare disease and trying to start at square one and introducing myself. And there's just so many times that we run into different providers who may have never heard of the disease type that you have. So it's just a very difficult process to have it happen suddenly, and to not be able to plan ahead, and to not be able to formally introduce yourself to that new physician and make sure that there's a seamless transition process. Several patients, and this was the part that really stuck out to us, they discussed about issues when it comes to surgeries. So one adult patient mentioned having a spinal surgery in 2 weeks. So not a lot of time. 2 weeks from now is not very far off. And they still haven't decided which hospital she would have the procedure at. Would it be at the children's hospital or the adult hospital? And her response was kind of, I guess I'll wait and see. And there's no opportunity for her to have an opinion on where she has this procedure, and no medical decision there. It's sort of they'll let me know where I'm supposed to go. There was many stories, again, and these were the scary ones, were patients either sharing experiences, caregivers talking about what if this happens, and the fear that is involved with emergencies. When there's multiple pieces to that, right? You show up at a hospital you've never been to, and the doctor tells you, I don't really know what disease this is. I don't know enough about it. One patient mentioned that she was out of town traveling, had an emergency situation, and in that moment had to connect that doctor with her pediatrician to be able to fill him in and get the proper care that she needed. And other times it's been conversations of, okay, I've had this emergency and I don't know what hospital I can go to. I'm out of town, or I'm at that point where maybe the children's hospital will accept me, but maybe they won't, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and no one's telling me what I'm supposed to do. Or if there's an emergency and I am unable to communicate, will the EMS workers know which hospital to take me to? Will they know how to think about the specifics of my airway? And there's so many pieces to that it's very concerning, and there's not a lot of guidance to understand, whereas during the pediatric years, it's pretty cut and dry. We know where we're supposed to go. We head over there, and then adulthood hits, and no one tells you, well, what's next? Many talked about different methods that they've used to prepare for things like that, which I thought was really wonderful, of different devices or signage or clip-ons to your person in your car to really help identify what needs to be done in an emergency situation. A few caregivers mentioned many of the same things. The conversations looked rather similar with the experiences. One mom talked about how when her daughter turned 18, she really had no say in what would happen. It was just, they let me know where I was supposed to go. They let me know where my daughter would be placed, and she had no say in the matter, and she found it very terrifying. Another mom talked about how it would be really important to her to be able to discuss these things far in advance, to be able to have that communication, to get to know these providers in the future when she has a child that won't be able to make medical decisions for herself. And so that when that time comes, it's not sudden, it's not abrupt, there's time to build that relationship. And she mentioned that in an ideal world, the situation would be that your doctor passes that caseload on to the new provider, and there's a formal exchange of information. And so that doesn't have to be a burden on mom, dad, patient, whoever, and that the doctors can work that out themselves. And that's something that hasn't been happening at her hospital. She's been able to advocate. Her son's only 8, and she's already having those conversations with her providers and letting them know, hey, we need to get on this now. What's going to be the process? You've got 10 years to figure this out, and we can do it together. So that's a long journey of patients and caregivers trying to solve this on their own. There was a few that also mentioned about how challenging it is and Nathan brought this up too in his video, of when you have some providers at a children's hospital and others not at the children's hospital, and now you're talking about 2 different systems. My health records are everywhere. I'm having to go to these different places, especially when you're looking at a rural community, where I know in our community we have parents that drive 8, 10, 13 hours away to go to the nearest children's hospital that's equipped to take care of their child. And then you add in a different hospital on top of it, and now where are we headed to this time? We have families that fly out of state just to get regular care, and it's challenging when you add this into the mix too. Now we're bringing in a whole different hospital system and starting over from square one, and I haven't even had that formal moving over here piece to it. So our hope for our project is to really identify the need, but furthermore being able to show where there could be improvement, and hopefully taking that a step further, having formal recommendations for how this process should go, and highlighting where there have been successes and figuring out how can we replicate those. We also think that while this particular study will focus on MPS, there's so many factors to this that really translate across board, especially with rare disease. And we hope that others will take that opportunity to emulate that in your own disease space. As I mentioned, yes, we have Nathan, who's an amazing Harvard Medical School student and all, but at the end of the day, I'm just a mom and he's a brother, and this was something that we've experienced, we thought was important. We heard from our fellow community members that this is a big deal, this is something we're struggling with, and we're able to put this together. Find the right people to ask, get the right experts involved, and you can address those problems all on your own. And that's something that we think is really important, and we hope that this will kind of provide the doorway to really spread this around to as many different disease areas as possible, and also just finding our similarities. So again, one of the big pieces too is just really the importance of collaboration within our community. I think I feel very fortunate that we see that so clearly in the Hunter syndrome community with different patient advocacy organizations that work together, not just with Hunter syndrome, but all the MPS types, that we can work so well together. We have these experts that we have these close connections with. We work well with the pharmaceutical companies in our area and their patient advocates within their organizations and different researchers, and more importantly, the families, and really looking and listening to what's going on, trying to be adaptive, trying to understand what's changed, what are the new issues that arise, because one thing that we have found is that with some of these successes come new problems, right? That's what we're experiencing now. We have some clinical trials that we're very hopeful for, and that's been the biggest celebration that we can have, is if being able to see kids with Hunter syndrome growing up into adulthood. And while we're so grateful for that, we can't ignore some of the new problems that might arise with that. And being able to look ahead, being able to address those problems, seeing how there's so many in the other MPS types that have lots of experience, decades of experience going through this, looking to them to find out what's worked, what hasn't, how do we address that? And that's something that can be done in any rare disease space. So I really hope that you were able to get a little bit out of that. Our next steps is I hope that you will keep an eye out for our survey. Again, we hope to have that out sometime next month, and you'll see us at World Symposium, some other conferences. We have our Hunter Syndrome Community Conference. We'll talk about some of the results then after we have them, but also just different patient advocacy organizations, and really we could use your help in helping us share the message and getting that out there. And I can take some time for questions if anyone has any, but also you can find my email, Nathan's email, and feel free to reach out to any of us at any time.
Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if perhaps you might know the history behind why at the age of 18, this magical transition happens, and whether or not as part of your project now or maybe in the future, you intend to speak to insurance companies and other payers and government healthcare providers, because it seems to me that if your child's optimal treatment would be to continue to be cared for by pediatric specialists, why in the world do we force people into a system where their healthcare is not optimized? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have the same question. That's one of the topics that we really want to address is, and who's telling you this? Who's not giving you the answers of which hospital can do your surgery? Who are you battling? There were an adult patient who mentioned that. I asked her, in an ideal world, how would you want this to happen? And she very clearly said, I just want to stay at the children's hospital where they have the equipment for me, they have the specialist for me, I don't need to start over. That would be my ideal world. And it seems to vary sometimes, and often it's the hospital system themselves. There's also the issue of insurance, and it can vary too. There are some where it may be a circumstance where perhaps the hospital as a whole has a cutoff age, and it's not always 18. It's often, in their 20s at some degree. But it could be provider by provider too. As you probably have experienced, sometimes your cardiologist might be at the children's hospital, but they're an independent contractor. They bill you separately, and maybe he can decide, I'll keep you on. We had some families talk about that especially with our geneticists. A lot of times our geneticists, we know them all. We're a tight community, and they're a lot more likely to figure out a way to keep kids on well into adulthood and never let them go. And that's something that we want to address too, is how are you working that magic? Can we replicate it? But you're right, we need to identify exactly who it is that's saying no, who's making the rules, and how are some getting around it, and can we continue to do that?
Hi, I'm from a disease group that shares much of what you've explained. I was nodding my head the whole time because these are very similar concerns that our adult population has. Our oldest patients are now in their 30s and 40s, which is revolutionary, but comes with all sorts of problems with adult care that no one really thought about or even anticipated would be a problem 30 years ago. I was wondering if you could elaborate on anything that you've seen in your research so far on programs that are doing it well. For example, you mentioned Boston Children's. Is there any highlight or any example you could give of programs that are worth looking at and trying to emulate or going to for tips?
Yes, absolutely, and I totally relate. That's exactly it. Something you never would have thought you would have to even think about, and now we kind of hoped for it for so long, and now here we are. So definitely the Boston Children's Bridges program. We really wanted to bring them in for a reason. What's the case is that their program is still new and sort of small when it comes to the variety of different disease types that they have involved. But really what their process has been, and I think this is wonderful and what many had mentioned that they would really like the process to look like, is that they have the connection between the children's hospital and the adults hospital. And as you may have seen sometimes at your own children's hospital, that maybe your provider has hospital rights at the adult hospital and whatnot. So they bridge that gap and they begin those discussions. They have a formal handover of the caseload from the pediatric to adult care, and it's almost held as like an IEP meeting, right? You kind of have your whole team together and you talk about that and you go through the specifics of those patients. And in cases where, especially with rare diseases that have the pediatric onset, where most adult providers don't see those patients because they haven't had the ability to grow into adulthood before, and so that's very new to them, whereas the pediatric provider may have had several of those patients. And that's something that's happening, is being able to share that information, being able to share that expertise, but also bringing in the patient or the caregiver into that conversation and making sure that it's done well in advance so that there's a nice transition period and it's very well explained. So again, it's pretty new there, and I think that's one of the biggest pieces why they wanted to be involved in this too, to make sure that there's not something that they're missing, something that families might crave and need, so that they can add that into their program.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Nate. I'm from the Histiocytosis Association. I have HLH, or had a transplant that cured it, but I still had like follow-up care. I'm 25, so I transferred to adult care a couple years ago, and it wasn't easy, especially because they didn't prepare me for that. It's one thing to transition from inpatient children's to inpatient adults, but then you have to transfer primary care doctors and transfer specialty care doctors on the outside. And I kind of got stuck with someone who can't get over the fact that my misdiagnosis was actually a misdiagnosis. He still thinks I have Crohn's for some reason. So I'm just wondering what someone like me would do when there's not really many options out there for rare diseases. Like, it's kind of hard enough to find someone who really knows what it is. And then when you transfer to adult care, and it's even less people who like kind of have an understanding of what it is, I'm kind of stuck, you know? Not really sure where to turn to find someone who can treat my disease, and I'm kind of just using him as like supplemental, like it's a mind battle. Like, I know I have HLH, despite the fact that you keep telling me I have Crohn's. So what is your advice for that?
Definitely, I would say try to switch doctors if you're not comfortable with them. But furthermore, I think that so many people experience that, again, especially in areas where they're not near one of our kind of self-proclaimed centers of excellence. And I think what families have really found as beneficial is connecting to patient advocacy groups, but also connecting to other families. We, in our disease space, we have so many doctors who are willing to just hop on Zoom or hop on the phone and give us some advice. We have families who, frankly, they're experts. They've been doing this for so long to get some guidance, because sometimes at your local hospital where you don't have the expert, you have to be your own advocate. And getting armed with that information going in, also having others help you to know what kind of questions to ask, what kind of tests you might need to ask for, really relying on your community as a whole so that when you show up, you can advocate for yourself and make those demands if you have to on things that you know need to be done. We see families going through that quite often, so.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm with the Undiagnosed Disease Network and the mom of a child with a rare disease who is now an adult, and we learned the very hard way when he was 21 what transitioning was all about. And I looked the intensivist in the eye and said, what was the point of keeping him alive until he was 18 if you're going to kill him now? Because they refused to follow protocol. So with that, we went to the, Minnesota has the RDAC, and we brought ECHO system. Are you familiar, is anyone here familiar with ECHO? It's a program where doctors can call out to a minimum of 7 other specialists in the surrounding area and have basically a care conference, get some feedback, bounce ideas off, and then go back to bedside and say, okay, I found somebody, I think this will work. And it's really helped us in Minnesota do a lot of the warm handoff, so to speak, when we're moving our kids from our children's hospital to our adult hospitals. And now one of our children's hospitals has developed a lifetime care center where their patients can just age all the way through.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and you brought up a good point. That was one of the biggest stories that we received through that survey I mentioned, the community survey, that really stuck with us, was a mom shared that her son was had just turned whatever the age was at her hospital that they age out of pediatric care. And it was an emergency. He had pneumonia, and with Hunter syndrome, it's a very big deal when you have pneumonia with our lung involvement and airways and whatnot. So she shows up at the pediatric hospital and they refuse to see the son. She goes to the adult hospital. They say, whoa, we don't have what you need to take care of you. Go back over there. And it was this constant back and forth. And during that time of fighting between the two hospitals, the boy passed away. So there's, it's a serious concern. And I think that's really wonderful that you put it straight to your son's, or was it your son? Your son's providers.
We're going to see if I can adjust this. I wanted to thank you for talking about such a critical topic. I'm the program manager of a cross-rare disease young adult program, and this is something I hear young adult advocates talking about a lot, particularly their individual challenges within transition. Some of those quotes from patient advocates and family supporters just really ring true. And I'm wondering if there are ways that you've seen young adult advocates participate in giving feedback, whether that's to an individual provider, to a hospital system, within a wider political or governmental context, on what their transitional experiences are, if there are successes that some of your advocates have had, whether that's pushing back against hospital systems, providing guidance for future forms of transition, any ways you would recommend young adult advocates really weigh in with sometimes what they're seeing, their really critical insights on experiencing that process firsthand.
That's a really wonderful question, and I'd love to be able to dive in more into the community broader to really answer that fully, but I think what I heard a lot was really just that individual advocacy when it came to this topic. I know within our NPS space, we have been on such a life-saving mission that now that we have, most of our MPS disorders now have an enzyme replacement therapy where they didn't before, and a lot of the focus was really on, we just need to survive, right? And now the door has sort of opened to give us the ability to look broader and address some of these issues. So I think what I heard so far from the group that we spoke to, but I think that's wonderful to really to bring that up with the adult patient population of what type of advocacy efforts have you led around this topic, but really talking about how once they reached adulthood, that for those that do not have a cognitive impairment, right, they were able to really step in and be their own advocate, making sure that they had a voice, sometimes before they even reached adulthood, that they wanted to make that clear that as soon as you're able, you could be a teenager, 13 years old, and trying to understand what's happening, what your doctor's talking about, what decisions are being made, so that when that time comes, you have that ability. And many express stories of sort of what the gentleman shared earlier of being at a new doctor. They don't know much about it. The patient can feel that, right? And being able to say, whoa, stop. Let's go back here. I don't feel comfortable with what you're telling me. I'm gonna call my doctor and we're gonna conference him in and get this figured out. Or being able to say, this is what I need. It happens a lot, not only with our adult population, but even our pediatric population of especially when things like anesthesia, where it's really terrifying. It's kind of life or death many times with having anesthesia and kids with MPS or adults with MPS, and people don't always listen. A couple of the adult patients shared stories of that where they really had to fight hard to say, hey, no, you will hurt me. This is how you need to do this, and I'm demanding it,